the afternoon session of the workshop on public trust in autonomous systems. So for the first talk in the afternoon section, we are very fortunate to have Professor Mengyao Li from Georgia Tech locally here. So Mengyao is a professor in the School of Psychology and the director of Hybrid Intelligence Lab at Georgia Tech. Her research aims to understand, predict, and shape human AI and robot communication, social cooperation, and long-term co-evolution, and aesthetic critical environments. So that makes her a perfect speaker for this workshop. And she has been a PI or co-PI on several university and DoD and DARPA-funded projects. And she has also been serving as the steering committee for the Center of Human AI Robot Teaming Center, that's the Charles Center at Georgia Tech, to host invited talks. So if you are ever interested in giving a talk at Georgia Tech, please contact her.
You have me over for sure. Yeah.
Thanks. And maybe just last personal note, Mengyao is that she has been my colleague, I think in 2022 of the research institute.
Yeah, for sure, lovely summer. Yeah, working so hard in the lab. Yeah, right. Having a lot of fun. I see him being working on like really late night, like playing around, like those things. Really an inspiring figure for me.
Just want to say, before talking to Mengyao during that internship, I had zero experience with human factors and trust in terms of in the context of autonomous systems, and by talking to her and the conversation really reshaped my understanding of what trust really means in AI and in robotic systems. I'm sure today she will enlighten you the same way as she has enlightened you. So without further ado, let's welcome Mengyao.
Thank you so much, Henry. Thank you so much for inviting me. Today is actually my first ICRA experience. In the past, I usually go to human factors or HRI, those conferences. So I got a lot of fresh perspective from the talk this morning and also seeing other works around. So hopefully my talk is more helpful and give you also a fresh perspective on trust. So today my topic is trust is contagious. Understanding and shaping public trust from dyadic, that pair one single human, one AI, to multi-human, multi-agent teams. So I'm going to share about some of my prior work on that dyadic interaction and talk about what are some limitations from that for us to understanding public trust. What are something we're missing? So why do I shift from that dyadic to this multi-human, multi-agent teams? But before we start, why are we here? We're talking about trust. I'm so glad this morning there are so many great colleagues already shared the definition on that. As Karen this morning mentioned that trust is really a loaded word. In our field, if you talk about trust, and people will just like bumping at you, say, oh, what's the definition of that? How do you measure that? How do you quantify that? Why do you even do that? So before all those confusion, I just want to lay down what's a definition that I believe in, that I use for all the following work, all the computational work I use later on, and why this matters. So the definition of trust is an attitude that an agent will help to achieve an individual's goal in situations characterized by uncertainty and vulnerability. So there are a few things here I want to highlight. One is that it is the attitude. It's a latent variable we try to predict. We try to understand from the human behavior, but it's not behavior at all. So taking over from the autonomous vehicle, that's a reliance or compliance behavior from the warning system. However, the trust is more like attitude, the latent, that it's more of your cognitive process. And furthermore, it has to have certain goal. You have to have some constraint, some goal operation. So you sitting in a Waymo vehicle in a parking lot without any destination, without any goal, there's no need to study trust in that. So we only study trust when there's a specific goal we want to achieve. So the goal is really important. And next, there should be some uncertainty. Similar case like the parking lot situation. So if you know the car is still, you won't move at all. There's no need actually for you to study trust in that. So do not just slap one more dependent variable in your study and say, I study trust. So you should only understand or study trust when there's some uncertainty, like there's a warning, there's a takeover warning. So you are not sure, oh, should I actually take over, should I not take over? Or using Karen's example, should you brake or not brake when there is a merging scenario in the highway? So that uncertainty really characterizes why trust is so important, because without understanding this, we couldn't predict what's the human next behavior in there. And finally, there's vulnerability. So vulnerability really matters. So I like Brian this morning's example, in the Amazon checkout session. You're scanning an apple to oranges. There's no much vulnerability there. So making a mistake there doesn't really matter that much. So therefore, all my work I'm going to show later on has certain aspect of vulnerability. So there are certain aspect of the risk, either it's autonomous vehicle or the military operation. So there is a highly safety critical environment that you have to situate the users or people in, therefore the trust really matters. So that's the really loaded definition for trust. And what matters more, like Brian mentioned, that we should really distinguish what's trustworthiness and trust. And we talk about the trust calibration. This morning, a lot of folks already share about some computational model on that. However, I want to highlight that we should never always increase trust or decrease trust. We should always let the trust to match that calibrated level, that simple linear line. So if your trust, people's actual trust level is much higher than the system capability, you might end up into the situation that people sleeping in the Waymo car or sleeping in the Tesla car. Because the capability of the Tesla full driving system is your trust level is much higher than that capability. So that's the situation we definitely do not want to end up with. However, we also want to be careful about that distrust. So that's the reason why we develop so hard for those fancy algorithm, new humanoid robot. However, nobody really accepts it, nobody really uses it, right? So those are those lower region. So we want to achieve that calibrated trust. But how do we do this? We all love a fancy diagram, but how do we do it? How do we quantify it? So I think as a human factor engineer or psychologist, we always love to quantify and measure a messy construct like a trust. So there are so many ways we can do it. In the morning, in the lightning talks, there are a lot of the colleagues share about self-report, just a simple survey, or physiological measurement. You can use EEG cap, the brain activity, brain behavior, your arousal level, your heart rate, your pupil dilation. Those can all be physiological arousal, physiological response that actually indicating people's trust. Or the behavior, you break or you do not break at all. So those are all different type of measure to study trust, and it actually has been studied quite intensively. But today I want to bring up a new thing, conversational measure. So this is a novel measurement that's becoming increasingly prevalent because of LLM. When I was studying this, it's only 2019. I hope I studied this more deeply. I'm actually deepening my work right now because of LLM, people have conversation, and conversational measure of trust is become a novel approach we can understand and quantify trust. And what do I mean by that? And what's the motivation for that? So this is actually origin from a NASA-funded project in the past that we have this long duration space exploration. So in the past, astronauts, they go to the moon or go to some place that's near to us. When the astronauts have any issue, they can just dial Houston, say, Houston, we have an issue. And then the ground control can immediately relay back that information to them. However, now we are moving from moon to Mars. It's really, really far away. So that means that the communication delay become not only seconds, become 15 minutes. So the astronaut, when they run into any critical situation, they couldn't really ask for that immediate support. So what they need to do is that they're going to have some onboard virtual agent, some you can call AI system or any virtual agent that has some domain knowledge to support them for any type of emergent situation. So you can easily imagine that you couldn't just interrupt astronauts, say, can you fill out this survey? Can I actually hook you up for this heavy EEG inside of your spacesuit, right? So the physiological measure is not really feasible. The subjective measure is not feasible. So measuring through conversation become an unobtrusive and novel approach that we're adopting for that project. It's a really easy thing to do, but it's really challenging as a lot of the researchers talk about. What does this really mean? We really need to, because trust is really latent, and we really need to estimate that from the conversation. Like this saying say, it's not just what you say, it's not only the lexical, the word, it's also how you say it. It's I'm really excited, or I'm excited. So the same lexical term with different tonality, with different energy, with different acoustic cue can express different meaning. So that's what we are trying to get at. And also, in the daily life, like I mentioned, trust need to have those components, right? In your daily life, your trust doesn't really fluctuate that much. Your trust might become relatively stable. So in order to elicit different type of trust-related conversation, we need to craft the situation in that. So we adopt well-validated variable like reliability to induce people into different trust state and to see what type of conversation they're really having. So imagine your ChatGPT or any type of virtual agent perform really well, your trust level might increase, and then the conversation generated might indicating a higher level of trust. Therefore, we can understand what does really mean for a trusting conversation. So with all of those assumptions, so we have a within subject design with different level of reliability to elicit different type of the trust conversation. So in the, for the NASA context, they're doing this carbon dioxide removal system, trying to maintain the habitat in a really lovely environment that's having enough oxygen. And it's a really complex system that we turn into a web-based web-based procedure following decision-making task. And this is really complicated, so I won't go into detail. However, the essential thing is that we design a really helpful conversational agent, Bucky, to help them to navigate through this. And then the Bucky conversational agent sometimes perform really good performance, sometimes really bad. Therefore, we can elicit different type of conversation. And by the end of each action, they're going through the CDRI system for 12 times. And by the end of each action, they have a little conversation like that. And before I play this, keep in mind this is before ChatGPT, so don't be underwhelmed by the conversation structure.
Please describe your experiences and feelings in the last procedure selection.
I think it's pretty good.
You can hear my voice.
Thank you. Why would you feel that? Can you explain your answer with more details?
Because the procedure I selected is correct.
So I won't underwhelm you by the simple structured way. One is because in the lab, so we want to control and touch on certain points. Two is before GPT, so I hand-coded a lot of the structure over there. So we had this conversation. We also had the ground truth from the trust survey. We try to see how can we actually predict people's current level of the trust from that conversation. So it's not really, so when I was presenting to the psych faculties, I elaborate on the process, but here I will just minimize that. It's a really simple machine learning model. So we just built a really classical machine learning model trying to extract the feature from the text, from the audio, from the combination of that, and trying to predict the final label of the trusting. And what we get is that we get a really reasonably well performance of R-square 71%. We can explain up to 71% of variance in people's trust. And we are not just okay with that. We are all trying to see what are some important features we are actually using from that model performance that are actually predicting people's trust. So it's a little bit tiny here because I don't want to go into technical detail. However, you can see that on the top, it will be like people's lexical feature like context sentiment and acoustic feature like the Foreman MFCC. So the combination of those actually gave the highest prediction of the trust score. And I recall there was a talk this morning trying to link emotion and trust. So what I did here is similar like that. So the high trust really demonstrated the positive valence high arousal as indicated by those meaningful features. So what does that really mean is that we can turn what's the implication of that is we can turn those abstract theoretical calibrated trust into a more manageable system. So we can, in the real time, if we deploy that online, deploy that in real time, so the chatbot or large language model can actually measure people's current trust level sort of in real time. And if the people trust level is much higher than the system capability, they can actually inject certain intervention to maybe repair the trust or dampening the trust a little bit. So put that in a more realistic situation is that if you can imagine like in the Tesla driving car, people are actually closing their eye, trying to sleep or doing something else, can you inject some trust dampening cue to help people to gain back that alertness about that system? So the system should be a dynamic and adaptive based on people's current state. Either it can be trust state or like drowning state. So what we're trying to do is trying to predict that latent state, therefore the system can be dynamically adapt to that. Okay, any questions so far? And what we found out there, as we enlightened by the title of this talk, all of those are quite dyadic. And later on, when we're trying to actually deploy that into the first figure on your left or right, is that we deploy that in this NASA Hera mission. As you can see, there is a team of 4 people. And then they're running this study actually with this chatbot and trying to actually activate that CDRS system. Later on, we learned that dyadic interaction is not the sole thing. And then sometimes the commander or the flight engineer will come to the person who are interacting with them and say, hey, I don't really like that system. Don't use that this way. You should actually do this way instead. So we run into this ecological validity issue that when you actually deploy the system, it's not only one single person interacting with them. You're not only inferring this one person's state. You have to understand the team dynamics and what are some other people's opinion towards that. And this is not only happening in NASA. You can also see that the human-robot interaction, maybe you have a robotics arm in the operating room, and you have a team of the nurse and doctor operating with them. So the interaction there really matters too. And in my team, in my lab, currently we have a lot of the military operation. So we have multi-human, multi-UAV, and an aerial vehicle doing surveillance and search rescue tasks. And it's also a team effort trying to do that. And on the very last picture, as you can see here, is a fire support training we're providing for NASA right now. It's also an array of the people, 4 to 5 people sitting together, trying to coordinate a really complex system. So what does this mean? That we have more and more situations require human autonomy teaming that beyond the dyadic interaction. So this means that when we understand, coming back to the topic for this workshop, the public trust, when we try to actually deploy the system into real life, we don't really just have this dyadic interaction. We also have between system transfer. So similar to Brian's interaction, conversation this morning, you might have Waymo, you might have Baidu, right? You might ride certain autonomous vehicle in US right now, but how does it really transfer from one robotic system to the others? How does trust really transfer? And the other condition I was highlighted in the slides before is that you're not only riding by yourself. You might ride with your family, you might chat your information on Teams online. There are a lot of the interpersonal connection too. You might have this conversation between others. So there's also human-human robot team as well. So in order to understand this public trust, what I believe is that we need to understand how does this trust really transfer between systems and how does it really transfer between the humans. And between the human is what I'm going to highlight on today, based on the time, is that I call this term trust contagion, just like emotion is contagious. If I'm being really excited right now, hopefully that's contagious to you. And what I believe trust is a similar process. A person, a group, or a company that can consciously or unconsciously influence other person's trust in robots through social interaction. And we propose a theoretical framework under review. Feel free to give me any suggestion on that. So there are system capability, whether the systems share the similarity between that, and what are some individual dispositional trust? What are some individual differences? Do they have more exposure to that? Do they have video game playing experience that's a transfer to autonomous driving experience, right? So intra-member characteristic, inter-member characteristic, and all of those influence the team process, individuals' trust in automation, and people's communication pattern, and also more importantly, physiological synchrony. So your people's heart rate and people's EEG signal actually in synchrony. And all of that becomes the emergent state of the trust contagion. And eventually those influence the team output or the team performance. And that form a feedback loop over there. And in order to test that, in my lab currently we have some preliminary work and trying to study really whether trust is really contagious and whether that's really will occur. So we have this RSTA task, recognize surveillance and target acquisition testbed, that 2 human members will doing a basic signal detection test. So they need to detect a white event, like from like a surveillance camera. They need to identify, oh, is that truly a target, or is that false positive, false negative, or is that miss? When they disagree with like the recommendation by the UAV, they need to veto that decision. And we have like two-member commander and interaction support. And we naturally induce one of the member into a highly trusting state or lowly trusting state by exposing them to some prior experience towards that. And then we also let them to wear a lot of the sensor data, like the pupil lab with the eye tracking, the emotive with the physiological sensor, the camera with their body skeleton tracking, and then their conversational data, and also, of course, their behavior measure as well. Since it's quite preliminary, I'm going to show some of the data here. So what we found is quite interesting. So we found that trust is indeed contagious, similar actually to emotion. However, it's asymmetrical. So what do I mean by that is if you look at the figure A, that's like how people actually perceive the other team member trust each other, trust towards the AI teammate. We successfully induce them into three separate states. The first line is high trusting, neutral, and low. And then when you look at the second figure B, that's like people's trust in the AI. So you will see that only the high trusting is significantly different from the others. That means that the high trusting people are actually, the contagion effects actually appearing. However, the neutral and low, they're not that distinct. So that means that when the other team member is really high trusting, say, oh, this UAV performed really well, the other people accepting that really quickly. However, when it's low, people actually take more time to think about it. Why do I say about that is that we also found from the conversational measure and also some qualitative measure that people when in high trusting, they're in that system 1, system 2 thinking. So when they're in the high trusting, they're in that rapid agreement mode. So they have much lower word count and much higher synchrony between their word level. So they're saying, yes, you're right, yes, you're right. So they're blindly agree on each other when it's like highly trusting system. However, when it's a low trusting system, people trigger that more deliberate process and they're trying to investigate a little bit more. So that effect is not really symmetrical. And there are more work coming out from my students up there. Hopefully the review process can go quicker so I can share more over there. And so those are more subjective measure and behavior measure. And we're also trying to transfer that to a larger team set, a team of 4. And here we're focusing more on that physiological, bio-neurological like data. So in the team of 5 here, we're also incorporating more of the team dynamics measure, trying to understand whether when there's a perturbation, when there's a critical event happening, how does the entire team adapt to that critical event? So we're collaborating with multiple institutes like Johns Hopkins, Arizona State, Charles River to form this really large project actually for DARPA, trying to get whether we can use all this physiological measure to understand people's latent state, what are the current cognitive state of them, and do they actually accurately predict the final team performance. And my part over there is actually trying to develop that model and trying to understand from that individual level feature, like maybe your ECG data, your EEG data, your communication data, and that interactional level model when you have that social interaction, whether you form certain synchrony in your EEG data, whether your heartbeats in sync together. Also that team level model, what's your team entropy of that, what's your reorganization from there. So from 3 different levels of the feature engineering and then some multi-task, multi-kernel model, we're trying to see whether we can actually better predict people's latent state and therefore better predict their team performance. Really exciting for that line of work. If you're interested, we can definitely chat more. And currently it's more preliminary, so I'm showing some pipeline and some preliminary data over there. So to end today's slides, I actually want to have this really interesting question. Even though I'm really excited about my work, however, there is a workshop like last year or 2 years ago at our regional conferences, HFES. The size is double this room, and the topics on does trust even have value at all? Do I need to spend this much effort actually modeling this thing at all? Right? So there are people opposing that, say, no, we shouldn't study this messy construct, this cognitive construct. You should only focus on the performance. However, along with my advisor, a lot of the great colleagues, I'm more on the pro side. Hopefully same for this workshop as well. we do think understanding public trust and trustworthiness definitely have the value for a lot of the safety. But I'm happy to maybe have more engaging conversation with this audience here. Yeah, thank you so much.
Questions for me now?
Thank you so much, Professor, for your wonderful talk. I think it's very interesting. I have a question regarding why, like the quality. It could be qualitative, and I understand if the results are only preliminary or under review, so you cannot like disclose it with us. But I wonder why the state of high trust is more contagious than the state of low trust.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I'm also quite fascinated because at the very beginning I was proposing that it should be the other way. So I thought the negative one will be more contagious. As you imagine on the Twitter, the hate speech got retweeted much more, right? However, I believe trust does definitely trigger a different process. As we show like earlier there, trust is still different from emotion. It's not only the valence arousal, the higher arousal therefore is more contagious. Trust is a multi-level facet. It's also about whether this system actually have the capability, has the ability, has the integrity to do that pretty well. So when people in that negative suspicion mode, and people might trigger a more deliberate process to evaluate on those capability and ability. So I believe trust is kind of fundamentally still different from emotion. So it is like can be some affective processing, sometimes can be affective processing. However, it also should be coupled with some analytical processing. So you're thinking about whether system perform well plus that emotional aspect. Yeah, very good question. Yeah.
Thank you. The question I have is more on sensor streams. So how much does a human need to see to have trust? So in terms of this contagious, can I lie to you? Can I say this thing's doing great and you don't see anything and you're like, I agree. You know,
So like the transparency of the actual system.
yeah, do
right?
I need, if it's a UAV, do I need to have a first person camera? Can I just see a dot on a screen? You know, and then carry in, does lying matter in terms of the positive contagious?
I think that's a really interesting question. So in terms of how much information you can think about in a dimension, right? So currently all the things I'm showing or example I'm showing are actually co-located. So two persons sharing the same environment. So you can imagine two persons in the same car, two persons viewing the same UAV. So you share almost all the same information. However, we know that's not entirely true. We also have distributed team. So you might have partial information, but other people might not have it. Or when you're like saying information online, you're retweeting online, and then you have your own partial information, others don't. So some part of work I haven't shown here is I'm going to develop a distributed human LM information custody system. So they're more demonstrating that when each person only have partial information, you don't share all the same information, how does it really change? So I also found that fascinating. And yeah, so hopefully I can share more on that, yes.
Thank you very much for the talk. I really like it. So my question is more beyond transparency. So have you think about even further, for example, as we have more LLM type of agents, what if you have adversarial agents that is deceptive? So in this case, like, will your framework be able to calibrate that as well, or there are some extra efforts that need to be done in terms of that?
Yeah, so you're discussing the transparency when there's adversarial like the agent, and they're intentionally attack you like in certain way. Yeah, I think transparency is definitely a huge topic, like in this area, transparency, explainability, and there are a lot of the people actually develop the work. Actually, this morning, a lot of people share like how do you explain and how much do you explain, and whether that really helps, whether that actually matters. I believe there are actually a line of work showing there's a amount of information you should share, but not overshare. If you explain too much, and people might get overwhelmed and couldn't process information quite well. So if you're interested, I can point you to that line of literature. Hopefully that can be helpful in some way. Yeah.
I have one more quick question. Otherwise, we are right on time for the next talk.
Okay, great.
Thank you so much.